second WFM Community show hosted by WFM Media. We are an initiative from India. We're in the business of facade and fenestration for the last couple of decades. And what we're trying to build now is a community where people from the facade and fenestration industry can come together and share their insights and make, it's incorrect to use words like the platforms, but to create a platform where people can engage, have interesting conversations, and also we talk about relevant subjects of particularly focused on facade and fenestration. Having said that, today, the 5th of November, we're still going through this COVID era, the longest ever force majeure era in history, and such is life. But here we are. Everybody is very optimistic, where I was telling our presenters here earlier in the day about hope is a strategy for the future. So with that in mind, we took this very important subject of building facades in high-rise buildings. I would like to start to introduce our panelist of today. Allow me to welcome the first panelist of today, Avinash Kumar, Associate Partner at Godwin, Austen. So as you can see, he's highly educated and coveted from SEP, from NIT Bhopal. He's been working in this sector along with products such as the Early Learning Center, Dubai Sports City. And he's a knowledgeable person on the subject. And while we bring him on, we will ask him further questions. We also have on board Dr. Belarmino Cordero. I hope I got this right, Dr. Cordero. I want to be very specific with the names. And he has a lot of experience in the Middle East and the UK projects with an academic background in architecture, environmental design, construction technologies. He takes care of architectural detail, innovation, integrated solutions, and pretty much he's worked all over the world. I'm delighted to have him here on the session. I'm also delighted to have Abdulmajid Karanouh. He's the head of interdisciplinary design at Drees and Sommer. Drees and Sommer specializes in building synergies between various building disciplines, specialisms to develop innovative context, urban building solutions. He has 22 years of experience in the Middle East, Europe, Southeast Asia. He's won a lot of awards, and Al Bahar Tars was co-authored. It's very interesting, and thank you once again, Abdul, join us here. Then we have Firas Hnoosh, design director and tall building expert. Amazing. Design director for Nordic Office Architects. He has more than 20 years of experience. He was earlier before with Perkins and Will, design director at Abu Dhabi Practice of International Architecture from Chancellor, SOM, Skidmore. Awesome. I think Firas, pleasure to have you here as well.
Thank you.
Mehboob, I think he's about to join us soon, but Mehboob is from senior architect at Perkins, Eastman in the UAE. He has 14 years of experience, very diverse in architecture and engineering consultation. So when I look at the kind of bandwidth, we pretty have 200 years of experienced people here in this panel. It's fabulous. We're joined also by Fahed Majeed, principal architect of Fahed Plus Architects, Royal Institute of British Architects. Yeah. I only looked at that Royal Institute once from the outside, sir. That's the only thing I've seen from the outside. And fantastic though, offices in Dubai, Bali. You've chosen your business locations very well, Fahed, I must say. It brings both the facets of tourism and business together, which is brilliant. And master in planning, urban design, architecture, interior design, listed as the top 50 emerging practices, hot practices in India. Like use a word. Fantastic. And I have given an XXX introduction to myself because I am an entrepreneur with 5 serial businesses that I run as McCoy Group, WFM Media being one of our businesses as well. And it's a pleasure to have, first of all, built this community. And it's a pleasure to have you all over here. So thank you very much once again for joining in. And we probably might have just Mehboob Ali joining us in a couple of moments. So let's bring out some optimism here in terms of what's going on in the future. You know, you have contradictory thoughts about high-rise buildings, and we were just talking about a statistic about Dubai being one of the top 3-4 places in the world with the maximum high-rises. So leave it to anyone to kick it off in terms of what do you think happens for the high-rise buildings as a business in the future? Maybe we can, kick it off with Fahed.
I think Dubai would come in the top four. I think the first being Hong Kong. So, but compared to the density of the population, as Abdulmajid was mentioning earlier, it's got a large number of buildings over there. So I think, Amit, the question was more about why is it so, or what do you see going ahead in terms of?
What do we see going ahead in terms of the need for high-rise buildings? And then we'll elevate into the facade aspect of it.
You see, I think high-rise buildings has been very controversial for very many reasons. But of late, with smarter systems coming into play, it is becoming a lot more viable and practical with time. If you look at just the Al-Bahar building that Abdulmajid was working on, that's a very beautiful benchmark for a smart high-rise building. So I think it's going to stay. And I think with the integration we're working on a project where we're integrating a lot of landscape and trying to see now for a state like Dubai, an emirate like Dubai, there's a lot of produce which is being sourced from other places. So we're trying to take this level of sustainability to one notch higher, where we can see if the structure can be self-sustenance in terms of, to a certain extent, in terms of the green produce. So I think a lot of emphasis also has been going on to make produce source materials locally. So I think, yeah, so I think it's a very good time looking forward.
Yeah, right.
Avinash, please.
I think that things are changing. I mean, before, you just see example of, let's say, 5 years back, you used to see only glass clad building. Now people are doing a lot of innovations. Like, for example, Al-Bahar Tower. I mean, that's the best example of how the active facade will work. I mean, the thing is that, I mean, the cost factor comes in between, but I'm sure after some time with more innovation and more technology coming into, I think these active facades will become more, I mean, we'll see more of them actually. So, I mean, rather than only having one glass clad building, things are changing. I mean, people are looking into new options.
So do you think that any of this is to do anything with the current 7-8 months that we passed in this COVID? Do you think that the 7-8 months gone by has helped us think a little bit more broader, more greener, more sustainability, more real time? We were talking a lot about sustainability in the previous times, but now with 6-7 months, which pretty much shut down and many months were shut down, it helped us really think the world can be a better place and we can do better jobs. Is that, maybe this is just a thought point question?
I think more than sustainability, I mean, sustainability, of course, is a central focal point. I think the quality of life is now a primary subject of conversation. So the moment I think we put more emphasis on it, things goes in a much more better direction.
So how would, let's say, Abdul, how do we translate quality of life into making high-rise buildings and then the subject of the right smart design facade for a high-rise building, if we connect that to the quality of life in any way?
Yeah. I mean, to start with, just to answer your first question, what's going to happen with the high-rises? I think, I mean, obviously with the constant increase of human population and the fact that urbanized areas are growing larger and larger, people from rural areas are moving towards the cities. So you're inevitably going to see, rightly or wrongly, you're inevitably going to see more and more high-rises appearing here and there. Even in cities where there are no high-rises, you're going to expect to see high-rises in those cities. That being said, there has been some studies carried out on the previous and current high-rises in terms of what that means, not just from an overall sustainability standpoint, but also from a human sustainability standpoint, in the sense that how has it impacted both people who work and live in high-rises. And many of those studies show that those that are fully sealed, so for example, fully sealed facade high-rises and high-rises that don't have much amenities, like say sky gardens or places where people can go out and breathe some fresh air, and can have some, basically some relaxation, or rest areas. Both workers and residents, they tend to suffer. Statistics show more than 70 to 80% of occupants suffer from depression. And the reason is because they're unable to connect with nature. So a lot of them who want to have a smoke, for example, or who need to breathe some air, would have to go all the way down, right, to the ground floor, and then find the nearest, for example, shopping mall or garden or whatever, right, in order to do a simple thing like having a cup of coffee or smoking a cigarette or any other thing, right? It becomes even more challenging for residents with families. So children, for example, want to play, right? They want to do some activities that you wouldn't be able to do in apartments. And it becomes really challenging when people are living on the 50th floor or 60th floor, right? And so on. So I think in that respect, you're going to see more and more integration of amenities, green spaces, right? Open spaces, let's just say more activities that you can find in parks, for example, in shopping malls, more and more being integrated in those high rises so that these become more livable places. And they become places where people are healthier, both psychologically and physiologically.
Very interesting, because what usually a glass building or a facade used to be called a box. Everybody say, wow, difficult.
In a way, if you think about it, it is.
Just box it and that's it.
Yeah.
That's how it started, right?
Yeah. For a long period of time, facades were always being looked upon as a wrap to the building, and I think that's the worst analogy that you can think of in terms of facades. Facades should be more like what the skin of the human body, right, is to the body, and this is really what facades should be like. And it's a medium of interaction between the interior of the building and the exterior, as opposed to an isolation between the interior and the exterior. The facade should be able to breathe, should be able to draw, from the sun, from the air, right, from the oxygen. It should allow people, as I said, to interact with the exterior, as opposed to completely shut them out and isolate them. The reason why, for example, you see most people, leaving the lights on all the time or leaving the air conditioning on all the time, irrespective of what's happening outside, is because of that disconnect, between inside and outside, and therefore we should be able to reconnect people, with nature through obviously building envelopes to start with.
Does that just to follow it up, maybe I'll ask Dr. Cordero to jump in and say, does that make, as a facade designer or an architect or a consultant in the same industry, does it make your life more difficult in terms of now? Like you said, Abdul, I really like what you said in terms of integration of amenities, living structures, the cause of depression. And especially now in 6 months, if somebody was locked out inside even an apartment building, living in Dubai, and I know that that apartment, a huge number of apartments you have in Abu Dhabi, Kal Kareem, or I can't remember the name. Sorry?
Reem Island.
Yeah, Reem Island. It's like hundreds of buildings. And of course, they have a swimming pool on the 5th floor and a walking area. But if you're locked in there, it's a little bit challenging. So maybe I'll ask Dr. Cordero to jump in, and then followed by, we can probably have us jump in. What is it? What challenges does that make you kind of experience now going forward?
Well, challenges. I'd like to. I had a comment that I fully agree with Abdulmajid. Before speaking about facades, we speak about architecture, and before architecture about urbanism. So, in the first place, whereas you could argue that maybe a high-rise is not very sustainable. It's more, it requires much more structure for the usable space than a non-high-rise building. If you look at urbanism, you will see like the carbon emissions per habitant of cities like LA compared to New York, of course, by having more density. That's now recognized as the way to go, and as we are more and more people in the world, we need to be able to live closer to reduce our emissions just in transport. And again, the issues that Abdulmajid was mentioning about mental health is spot on. I think in the way the style of life that is very common to cities is not very healthy, because the only place where you really interact might be the elevator. So and that's not like a very inspiring place to have a conversation. So for sure, I think it might be possible that we will start having more amenities embedded, like in mid height, and possibly connecting. I mean, we're already seeing these kind of buildings that are not only connecting vertically, but also connecting horizontally. Maybe it's not purely a high-rise, but the new Atlantis, right? It's a kind of a scheme where you have horizontal connections between the building, and it makes things more interesting. In terms of challenges, I think maybe there's a discussion that I will throw in, which is what's been criticized many times is, whether having glass on the buildings, but we need to understand that the main reason for building a high-rise is, where the value is that you have very, very nice views out. So you need transparent materials for the facade. And I think the main question here is whether I don't see quite yet a substitute to glass. I think glass it's a great material. It's not combustible, and it offers containment also with lamination. And if you build a high rise, you have to already acknowledge that around 50% at least of the facade is going to be glazing. Because what's the point of spending all that money to have maybe an apartment on a 50th floor if then you're just going to cover it with a solid wall? So I think that's something we need to acknowledge, and there's ways that in which we can we know that the thermal performance of glass might not be the best, so there's ways in which we need to counterbalance that maybe we know that we can be harvesting energy now with the photovoltaics or other means, and we can also optimize we can offer shading integrated within the design, so we can vary the amount of glazing for each orientation. So there's many things that we can do. I don't know if this answers exactly your question.
Oh, we're just brainstorming. Firas, let's hear something from you about the future of high-rise, the facade, and the challenges.
Oh, thank you, first of all. I think before getting into facade design, I think in terms of high-rises obviously are often used by cities as symbols of economic success and ambition. But they also can solve some interesting and important urban problems, such as obviously population increase and densification. Densification can be good for cities because it allows us to use and capitalize on existing infrastructure rather than expand horizontally and build more. I know it's not in people's mindsets, it's not an ideal image to have high rises everywhere. But this is where we need to actually change our thinking and view of high rises, such that they're not these sort of dystopian containers of people packing them vertically into taller and yet taller buildings. So high rises can be a helpful solution to the issue of urban populations, and densification is one of the solutions, or is an important solution for cities of the future, especially large dense cities like Delhi, Hong Kong, New York, and so on. In terms of facades for high rises, maybe I could start with the local market here in Dubai or the GCC. I think all of us have seen more than enough of glass or crystal buildings here in this region over the past few decades. Which were simply imported designs and forms and shapes from other places, if you like. The only thing that they changed is basically worked on the G values and the light transmission of the glass facades, and the rest is pretty much not so different. So they end up being huge consumers of energy. Unrealistically, especially in a desert climate like Dubai's, it's unrealistic to build glass prisms, if you like. So I guess I'm hopeful, and we've seen a few examples that started to be more conscious about this fact, trying to move away from the glass prism approach and think of facades that are more energy efficient, that has more solid than vision glass, reduce the solar intake into the building, and of course, work on adding thermal mass. And these approaches are slowly yet surely gaining momentum. I hope they are. And I encourage all fellow architects and engineers to push in that direction. Still, admittedly, there are still, unfortunately, glass prisms being built. Most recently, the Brookfield Place Tower in the IFC. It's very disappointing to see such a tall, massive building go in the heart of the IFC, all glazed, when especially coming from a very renowned design practice or architectural practice to have pure glass facades. So there are good examples and bad examples. There are practices that have to change, but I think I wanted to provoke a conversation more than give a solution.
Let me also help in welcoming Mehboob Ali Shoro from Perkins. Hi, Mehboob. You were a little couple of minutes late to join in, but never mind. Hi. We are trying to spark a debate here in a controversial conversation. We will, and I think I'm grateful to Firas to have actually pitched it in by taking a relevant name of a particular project. But you know, this is part of life. I'm sorry, I'm not too aware of the DIFC project, but having said that, this must have been an inception to reality for the last at least 5 years, right? Give or take a few, between 4 and 5 years. And it just got finished as you inform, by a large company and a large organization where, I'm sorry if any one of you were involved with it. I don't want to get into that. Avinash, is that you?
I'm not involved. I'm just saying that sometimes it depends actually. The client says that, okay, I need a glass building.
Right.
There's no option actually. Unless the client is ready to look into like some other details. Like we have some examples actually. It's not done by us. I mean, there's a building in Kuwait, I think they call it Al Hamra Tower, done by Sommer. I mean, I saw some initial sketches. I mean, that also started with like all glass, you can say glass building, but finally they came with the concept that the southern side is like all like a solid mass and the glazing is only in the northern side. It's great actually. And it's something like, it's a context-based design, you can say. It looks like, okay, that thing is designed for that place. I mean, not that, okay, you just bring a glass box and fixing it anywhere. So that sort of approach, I mean, it's coming up again. It depends on the like the final stakeholders or the client. I mean, how they want. I mean, sometimes they say, no, we want only the glass building. So sometimes it becomes difficult to convince that, okay, I mean, there are other ways. So again, there are the factors.
Of course, there are always a client and there is a designer and there are so many connected parties, and the one who pays is largely the client who basically takes the decision. Mehboob, you're on mute. You wanted to add a point here.
Yeah, actually, I want to say regarding the glass, if it's complying all the criteria, so I don't believe the glass is bad to use. If Dubai, if you consider Dubai is a modern city, and if you consider to the opaque material like you have a GRC and the facade or what you call it, precast panel, so they require more U value. So I mean, in this technology, the glass is far better, and glass gives you a modern style. So you can use as a modern material, but not used in the ages back. But it's become as a modern material. So it has a style. I mean, it looks nice. You have a tall buildings in the city, and especially on the road. If you're talking about the DIFC or Sheikh Zayed Road, it's famous because of these buildings. So I feel the glass is one of the best material to be used in the facade.
Absolutely, we're not really competing with the glass. But the whole idea was that the learning. I think with everything you make mistakes and you learn fast and you fail fast, and then once you. But there's I was doing a little exercise with my daughter's new education program, and the professor from the University of Princeton said to me last night that. What is better, a fail environment or a safe to fail environment? I like that point, right? The safe to fail. It's like there is enough education and skill development which our kids are going through with learning and all these apps and stuff, but they're only teaching you a skill. But where is the skill deployment? And the skill deployment is where this company was trying to do something. And he said, I want to build a safe to fail environment. And if you fail, it's still safe. So in terms of high-rise buildings, and I would request Firas to actually help me navigate a controversial question going forward. In order to make a safe to fail environment going forward, what is the lessons that we have learned by high-rise buildings and what we should not be doing going forward connected to the facade? What is it that you would feel? We'll come to what choice of materials and stuff in the next question. But what is it that we, from the last 20 years of experience and the last 6 months of COVID, what is it that we should not be doing in high-rise with respect to facades? Not to do.
Well, interesting question. I don't know.
I just framed it. I just thought it'd be interesting to ask.
Yeah. I'm not sure COVID has much impact on it. In fact, there's a bigger discussion about the office of the future and how much of office space we need, but that's a very different discussion I don't want to get into. But going back to the facades and what's wrong and what's right, I think Dubai has had its share of high-rises, obviously, over the past few decades, and there's quite a few high-rises we can observe. Some of them have, I'd say, very few have aged gracefully in terms of the high-rises you see in Dubai. And there's very few you would like to visit and enjoy visiting after them being built, 10, 20 years ago. And big part of that is, I think, the building systems or the facade systems and technologies used, the materials being used. I'll give a very simple example. I absolutely loathe ACP panel cladding with mastic joints. I think it's just beyond my belief. Why is it still being used in this environment? Although there's no good scientific reason to use it. And I'm sure people will say it's all about, sand and humidity and corrosion and all that kind of stuff. I fully understand that, but there are solutions to this. Looks, very unfortunate use of material. Stone cladding, for example, very few good examples in the city. When stone is a beautiful material, should be used intelligently, gracefully. It's very timeless. Yet you're very hard pressed to find a very convincing solution in terms of stone cladding. Rain screens, all sorts of types, whether terracotta or metal or even stone. So I think there's, I hope there will be more focus on the quality of construction and really applying the system to a high standard. Perhaps some of it was because of the haste in building or construction about 14 years ago, when people were racing to build as fast as possible. And you can see JLT is full of those examples. But nonetheless, I think we don't have to rush the same way today. And I hope we can take our time and focus on facade systems and detailing and sort of let go of past mistakes or let's say bad habits that have developed over the years.
Yes, you're still being very nice and sweet and fairly democratic and diplomatic about the words, the choice of words. Let me change it to maybe I'll ask Abdul. Be a little bit brash, man. What is it that bloody shouldn't be done? Man? Just change it, right?
No, I have to agree with both Tito and with Firas. Firas, especially when it comes to ACP. One of the reasons why ACP is still being used because it's cheap and it's easy to shape, right? But I totally agree with Firas that this is normally a material that is used on warehouses. Somehow it found its way, into high rises, and it's completely, to me, I mean, I still can't get my head around it, other than the fact that I know for a fact it's very cheap and easy to specify and easy to fabricate and install. With that being said, I think as a minimum, going back to the previous point, as a minimum, it should be 50-50. That is to say 50 glazing, 50 solid as a minimum. really in the Middle East, you're probably going to find that it makes even more sense to have 40, maybe 30% to 60, 70 solid. Now, I agree with the notion that if you're going to have a high rise, why do you want to limit the visibility so much? Because that limits the view. The counter argument to that is if you have too much glazing, then you have too much glare and too much sun coming in. And inevitably, you're either going to have highly reflected, or heavily coated right glass, which will, compromise admission of natural diffused light when there's no direct sunlight, or you're going to have the blinds pulled down for long periods of time during the day, which defeats the purpose of having large, open glazed areas in the first place. So, it's about having that balance. Now, the other thing is when it comes to increasing thermal mass, again, which I agree with Firas, because if you're going to, if you want to retain energy inside the building, cooling energy, that is to say, you need to be able to maximize the benefit of having thermal mass, because this is where you can store coolness right into the building more efficiently, because glass facades are not efficient at keeping cool or keeping the heat outside the building in that respect. Right. So this is where I encourage, for example, more tube-in-tube kind of systems, where you have, for the most part, the columns being pushed towards the perimeter of the building, but then the columns become part of the facade and not hidden behind glazing facades. And this is where you strike a better balance between solid and transparent, right? And this is where you can basically reduce the areas of the glass, and as I said, increase hopefully thermal mass. And also, when you have that structure more exposed to the outside, then that structure also becomes shading elements, right, to the facade. So if you can express the geometry right outside the building a little bit more, then if you work out the geometry in an intelligent way, that becomes like a shading element, a natural shading element to the facade. When it comes to aging, yes, I mean, to this point, really, one of the few buildings that I like in Dubai and that has aged really well, for example, is the World Trade Center. And one of the reasons is because it's not a fully glazed building. It was actually designed with, well awareness and consciousness of the fact that it's a building that is going to be exposed for, high amount of solar radiation. And therefore, even if you look at the window, the glazed windows, right, the punch hole windows, how they were positioned, they were actually positioned inside and at the upper, corners, depending on where it's located with respect to the orientation of the sun. So here's a clear example, right? A building that has been built maybe more than 50 years ago, I think, or it was built in the 80s, right? So it's at least more than 40 years ago. So in that respect, you look at it, it looks like it was built just a few years ago. So it's aging perfectly well. It's a really good example in terms of how you can design and you can finish, right, a facade. And to me, it seems timeless as well. Like glass facades, I find it amazing how architects are still using them. They're still replicating them. And when, from a technical standpoint, from an aging standpoint, from a functional standpoint, and even from an aesthetic standpoint, there's, they're pretty much the same. So where's the architectural identity, I would say? Where's the cultural identity, right? Where's the functional identity? If you have a residential building that looks almost exactly the same like an office building, that looks almost exactly the same as a hospital, there's something wrong, with all due respect, with the design approach and with the thinking. And so there's a lot of education to be done. And to your point, it also starts with the client, because yes, there are a lot of clients where they say, oh, I want, I'll give you a perfect example. There's this building that I was working on, it's a low-rise building. And for the most part, it's a roof building, really, right? And the idea was to have this nice solid roof with a more transparent, facade below, but it's a well-shaded, right, transparent facade. And then the client said, why do you have this solid roof? Why don't we make it glazing? So why would you want to make it glazing? He said, because it would look neater and cleaner and, basically shinier. I'm like, no, it's not in this region. It's going to be covered with dust and sand for the most part, unless you clean it every day. So this is where we really need to do a better work, I would say, as architects, consultants, engineers, and contractors to educate the market.
I'd just like to add a follow-up thought to what Abdul, you said, that The fact is there is a living evidence of more than 30, 40 years of buildings which have been existing, not only in the Middle East, but pretty much all over the world, maybe more, that the learning should be adopted from whatever has happened so far. I love the concept that ageless buildings or facades, functional facades, and a hospital can't look like a residential and a commercial, and
it's beyond me.
Vice versa. But I think now we know, like I'm just repeating myself, the safe to fail is what shouldn't be done, that a hospital shouldn't look like a commercial building, and that shouldn't look like a residential building, and that shouldn't look like a school. Maybe that's what not to do to a high rise. And Dr. Cordero, you want to add in here?
Yeah, I like following following up with Abdulmajid's thoughts. I'm very aligned with his thoughts. And another very easy concept where you can see things not to do is a building which is not responsive. So I think glass is perfectly fine, but you cannot have west, east, north, and south orientations look the same, basically. That means that it's just not being carefully thought. A building should always be responsive to the function, as Abdul was mentioning, but also to the orientation. So it's just putting the right material in the right place. And we know that with 50%, 40% glazing, you still have the views out. And if you put most of the glazing in the right orientations, or if you have overshading by other buildings, then you're gonna enjoy the views out, and you're gonna not have glare. So I think that's the point, and maybe this links a little bit with what Mehboob was mentioning, that I don't think we should be averse to any material. It's mostly performance and also how that material is being used. So I think a performance-based approach is always preferable. So I would say, look, maybe glass is fine as long as it demonstrates that it's going to comply with the energy. It could be difficult, so they will need to find a way to comply with energy, with daylight, with glare. It just needs to tick all these boxes, safety, etc. And there's many combination of materials that could be successful.
I'll take it up to Fahed. That is there like whatever we've been just discussing in terms of, like Dr. Cordero just mentioned about a checklist. Like the future of high-rise facades would be a checklist-based format. Does it meet this criteria? Does it meet this criteria? And then you can select. And I think that's possible now based on a lot of experience, right? You have experienced in Bali, which is a total beachy area, and then you have Kochi and the Middle East.
Yeah, I think what Dr. mentioned is very fundamental to any design approach. I think we don't personally believe that using any material in excess, let's say using glass, as Abdulmajid was saying about the World Trade Center, it's a good example where a lot of things, the fundamentals has been addressed. So, and I think there's a huge gap recently in contextualizing the building. Now, I think one of the challenges of the gap, which the building has to be owned by the region first. Often these buildings are a little disconnected from the region. It doesn't, maybe, I mean, there might be a mashrabia, but the Middle East stands for more than a mashrabia. So that is a gap in terms of materiality, in terms of texture, in terms of how do you connect it to the context, how do you connect it to the people who belong to that region. So that I think is, the place has to own the tower. That I think is very important. I'm not repeating the rest of the points because I think most of the points valid mentioned by Mr. Abdulmajid and Doctor and Firas are all very valid. So yeah, I mean, any material, even glass, used in moderation, excuse me, used taking into account the right orientation, the solar gains, etc., is fine. But the contextuality is something which I think it's a distant dream at this point, I think.
Why do you think so? Why do you think so? Avinash, please.
Yeah, there's a practical reason actually. I mean, what Fahed said and Abdulmajid said, it's right actually. What's happening here that all the materials, I mean, anything new comes in the market, the civil defense and FLS, like the bylaws are so stringent that it has to be tested to certain rules and all those things. And most of the new materials, if like, for example, us, I mean, we wanted to put some new material in some of the buildings. And finally, everything was okay. We did the design. And then finally, we started checking the compliance. The supplier had no local certifications and all those things. And that's where it started affecting the program and all those things. And then we have to revert back to the whatever material we had, like GRC and all those things. So there are reasons actually. All the suppliers, they don't have the right testing certificates, or like it's not complying to local regulations sometimes. So that's one of the reasons people in the Middle East, and they're not able to like experiment with all sort of materials.
I mean, that part, I think, Avinash, also one of the challenges, most of the products are manufactured based on European standards. So it's really, there is a lot of gap in terms of the character of material, like ACP is a inline material.
I would Mehboob, you want to add into this question?
Yeah, actually, I am today reviewing the same item, what they're talking now. I have in my project, we have in the design Decton cladding in the facade. But when we submitted the folder to the DCD, and they come back that this is not registered with the DCD. So agree. I mean, this kind of things we are facing here, and yeah, approval and registration from the civil defense, it becomes very difficult for the all suppliers, and mostly material which we like. Architectural point of view, I can say Decton is very nice, and the elevation looks like as a new item and as a feature in the roof. But now I'm looking again, going back to look something in the ACP or in the some porcelain to find a proposal to fit this thing. Yeah, this is a major factor in the facade, especially if we are talking about the UAE. The registrations and approvals are really play a big role in the facade material selection.
I have a just a thought point which just emerged. We being media for the facade and fenestration community, would you think that you would support us if we would take up a movement to create the right checklist? I really liked, Firas, when you said own the region, own the cover based on the region, that currently there is a disconnect between the product which is used, let's say, for example, in the GCC, vis-a-vis where it should actually be not used. Do you think that one of the reasons that we built this community is to actually create value? Let's say we're having a little debate here and it's a brainstorm. We want to make use of this. We want to actually create this is just a thought which has just emerged, and I will ask my editorial team if all of you concur to create a checklist of what not to do. If you create a checklist of what not to do, at least you'll be able to do what to be done better. Would you support that movement with us, sir? All of you?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I definitely support it, but I think it should be regulated by some organization.
Yes. We will take TUV or somebody as part of the program.
Yeah, I mean, as an architect, I'm sure it's a great advantage to have a database of facade materials and systems that are more suitable for this region, for its climate, that designers can specify. Of course, that would be great help. And I will take it up with the civil defense. We'll take it up with the IFT or somebody from Europe to help us curate a checklist, and that we can then circulate across through the community to make sure that it's built for the industry only. It's not built for any advantage to us, but it could avoid unnecessary waste of time where all of us, like right now, just Mehboob said, you've done all the work, and then guy says, sorry, you can't use it. And this happens a lot, right?
Yeah, it's common, yeah. I mean, sometimes at design stage only, and like in this case, it's like too extreme that on site he is checking those things which are not approved. Sometimes it happens at tender stage or like maybe before tender stage. I mean, normally it should be at the concept stage. We have to make sure that things are like all approved here. Look. Today's
day and age, the world has become so technically advanced in terms of knowledge, dissemination, availability of information that these things can happen faster, but there is also bureaucracy in the whole world, internally inside an organization, internally inside a government, blah, 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 that there are always, but I would like to take up this initiative, and I tell our team at the back end to take it up as an initiative to make a checklist, even if it's not regulated right now, but at least to start a thought provoke of things that all of you have experienced and you're talking, that we can at least put that as a circulatory to across the worldwide community of facade users, designers, developers, and architects, that these things you can avoid. And this is coming from
what I would highly encourage next to actually what should precede a checklist is really a working criteria that will end up with a checklist. Yes, because you see, unless people are true to a process that makes sure that you are developing a design that is responsive and contextual, it's very easy, and I know this for a fact from people who do sustainability ratings, for example, and certifications. It's always easy to make your way around these checklists, and you tick the box right one way or another, and in many cases in a disingenuous and misleading way. So I think what for people to understand where this checklist is coming from and to understand the value of ticking those boxes, it's really important to lay out before them, right, a criteria and the process that leads them to that checklist, so that it doesn't become just a box ticking exercise. It becomes a process, if that makes sense, that adds value.
Abdul, as we're speaking at this point of time, the idea of creating something like this has just emerged during this conversation. And I'm going to take up this initiative personally along with my team to certainly set out a set of papers to you after a couple of weeks, after talking to some other people, and probably share it with this group, pristine group right now. You can give us some thoughts. And I only feel that as human beings, as individuals, as professionals, if in our living life, we can add some value in avoiding mistakes, and I like that word this professor used, safe to fail, that at least we've done something more than just the subject at which we are here for in this life.
Yeah.
And why not? If we can, if we know, and then we can probably try. I want to add, I'm going to take this session to another 10 to 15 minutes, if that's okay with all of you, and then we can wrap it up.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay.
Yeah, cool. Can make it more interesting, and I'm not going to let you guys go away I'm enjoying myself. I don't know about you guys. I'm enjoying myself, and it's a learning for me. I've written 7 pages of notes. But what is interesting is that we can actually continue to have engaged conversations going forward to be able to educate our industry folks in terms of what could be the possibilities. And I'm going to take up this point, Abdul, from you, in terms of going forward in facades, what kind of extent of prefabrication can be extended in order to ensure the speed of the work and also to ensure the more efficiency of work? And then we can take it up with the other members here to talk about it.
Yeah, as I was saying earlier, it goes beyond just prefabricating building elements separately, like a facade, for example, with unitized panels. I mean, this is ancient old now approach and technology. We're talking about now more, as I said, maximizing, right, the chunks of the building that can be prefabricated and unitized offsite. And as I said, an example is to prefabricate an entire room, for instance, with its facade, its finishes, mechanical services, and so on, all together as one unitized element, and then bring it on site as just Lego, right, units, and just assemble them. Now, that normally works well for low-rise to medium-rise building. Of course, when you have a high-rise, you cannot keep on stacking units on top of each other. It makes them inefficient. So for this reason, for example, you want to start thinking of more like a superstructure grid, where, say, for example, every 9 units can be packed into one grid, and then you replicate, the same module as you go up. So I think modular design and modular construction, I don't necessarily mean sizes-wise repetition, but I mean from a phenotype standpoint, is going to become more and more popular, because it will help to innovate, right, and be able to replicate that innovation in a more efficient way.
Do we have any buildings already existing with that kind of modular construction?
Yeah, modular construction, there are many examples out there, but as I said, they're limited in heights at the moment to only like 8 or 10 stories. A few of them in Europe, a lot of them made of timber because it's lightweight. But an actual high-rise made of modular construction, no, I don't think we have it yet. There were some examples in the past in terms of precast, but that's not the same concept. And precast structures for high-rise has been banned in a few countries, especially in the UK, because of lack of safety when you have collapsed in some of the components at low levels where it could cause the building to cascade down. So yeah, no, high rise is not yet there. There's been a lot of ideas, as I said, a lot of studies, but I'm sure at some point this concept is going to.
So it's a probable a new business opportunity for high-rise buildings with prefabricated elements would actually enable some new businesses to emerge in terms of software, hardware development, technical design, orientation.
And this approach will also allow people to customize their units, right? So you have a certain volume to occupy, but because these things are prefabricated offsite, it gives people the opportunity to customize a little bit more, their units before they actually arrive on site. And it can also give an opportunity in the future to remove those units, for example, refurbishment, or change them and bring other users. So it's almost like plug and play. And it works really well with the concept of smart as well, where you can relocate from one place to another, for example, if you just remove your unit from one superstructure and you can insert it in another superstructure.
That sounds very sci-fi. I'm actually trying to imagine that I'm moving over.
But it's technically doable. Like, it's not, it is very technically doable.
But do you think something is happening, let's say, for example, in the Middle East for a project like that? Is there something in concept stage? Anyone?
I cannot reveal. I know of a few, but they're confidential.
All right. So we know where it's coming from. All right. But I wish you all the very best. And please give us a tour when it's ready. Sure. Firas, anything to add on prefabrication or anybody else on the subject?
Well, prefabrication has been, as a concept, has been very much hyped here in Dubai and the Middle East for the past decade or so. Dubai has, I think, some interesting manufacturers who have existed here, and they've been working in the region and beyond. And I think we should explore it more in our buildings. Certainly hotel buildings are using prefabrication in terms of rooms and pods and so on, very successfully. But so far it's been pods and prefab, at least in the mindset of designers, has been more about repetition and very sort of mundane, repetitious designs. And we should actually try to break that mold and think more creatively about prefabrication. And other things prefabrication can guarantee, or at least provide us with higher quality of finishing on site, because it is done in under controlled conditions in a factory before it's assembled on site. And I think, this is what I've experienced, is that oftentimes the hindrance for using prefabrication is usually a financial or economic one in the region, because traditional concrete frame and block work is usually cheaper because of the labor cost. Whereas in the a lot of Western developed economies, you find that prefabrication actually works favorably in terms of cost, simply because labor cost over there is high. So it's interesting how to tackle that problem. I don't have the solution exactly, but definitely I think the solution lies into increasing the scale of use of prefabrication. The more we do, the more prefabrication we do, hopefully less the cost and more widely used, and we get better quality. Everybody wins.
I'm gonna add a controversial question in terms of fire safety. We have all seen a fair number of, and I think Firas was very sweet to talk about ACP, and so Abdul supported him as well. And they are the biggest cause of this beautiful facade fires spreading like rocket science. I was told by somebody at one of the authorities in the Middle East that there may not be a lot of new buildings coming up in the Middle East, but there will be hundreds, rather thousands of buildings which need to have facade getting stripped and then redone. So assuming that, I believe that this is already in action. I'm sure you will know better, because the first from the design stage comes to you, some of you, that what would you do now? Let's say there are 500 buildings coming up in the next 3 years to strip down and redo. So I call it new work. It will be more expensive actually than reworking that than it would have been done originally, if I'm not wrong. So let's say starting from you, Dr. Cordero, you got to strip the facade. You got to keep fire as a very important element of that. What is, so there's a question for all of you, and that will be a last question that we'll probably try to wrap up with. So there's going to be new buildings which will be stripped facades and we'll redoing them. What are the precautions? What are the materials that you'll be focusing to use in terms of making sure that it's safe for the next? I love the World Trade Center example because I used to live at the Novotel for the longest time, which was at the World Trade Center. And that building actually, since 1999 that I've been there, it still looks the same. So Abdul, nail on the head. And if you want to actually look at the Louvre back in Paris and so on and so forth, what is it that you would do, Dr. Cordero, in terms of stripping this building? What are the materials that you would want to use? There are plenty of high rises there. And what would you suggest to the community to follow?
Well, I think that's definitely, refurbishing is a very important part, not only for fire, but also for sustainability, because a lot of the buildings that have been built over the 50 last years are just not up to the standards that are necessary today. Even if you think about carbon emissions, okay, we can be building very efficient buildings, but by 2030, I think the 60% of the building stock is still going to be buildings that are existing today. So it's very important to think about how to refurbish them. And since we're going to have to strip them down and build them again, I think now we're much more aware now than before that we should always be thinking of the full life cycle of a building. And we should always be thinking of how that will be actually either demolished or just disassembled, and can kind of go into a circular economy model where how can you remove the previous components and reuse them again, or recycle them, or put them safely back to the environment. That wasn't considered. So I would definitely, since we have to refurbish now the buildings, definitely they will have to be built with non-combustible materials, or at least they will need to be tested, to the right performance, fire performance. But I would take the opportunity also to improve the thermal performance, also the air tightness, and I would also be thinking of how to if they would need to be, when we design, we need to think if they are going to be used for 15, 30, 50 years. And coming back to the mastic seals, no one can expect in this environment the mastic seals to be working after 10 or 15 years. They will be cracked, they will be leaking, and they're not going to be efficient. So how can you, if not, how can you replace that in the future? I think that's something we need to be considering. So that's just some thoughts. I'll leave it for the rest to
I'm going to add this to my future building checklist project, and we will try to circle it around. Avinash? Yeah, as you said, I mean, it won't be a practical, I mean, it will be like not easy to strip off the whole thing and rebuild. I mean, it will require a lot of planning and materials also. And I think regulations also, I mean, will play a major role that, okay, let's have a regulation which says that, okay, the whatever new thing you're doing, it has to be more sustainable. And write some new codes that, okay, I mean, whatever the new fabric is coming has to be sustainable, and prove that how it's going to add to the environment and all those things. So a lot of factors are there. I mean, so let's see. I mean, those factors will have to be heavily considered in order to go forward, right? Yeah. That will be a prerequisite, right? Yeah. It has to be something which even the codes has to be rewritten or something like that, actually. Fahed?
I mean, pretty much what Doctor has mentioned. We're working on an interesting project, which is bordering what you said. It's not a complete building restructuring, but a part of the skin. So we are trying to work on some 3D printed components, which can have some, I don't know, smog eating properties, but those properties, we don't have an approval or a clearance yet. So we have been asked to get the report submitted. So it's a bit of a long drawn process, and it has to be dealt in a smart way because it is not a very straightforward work. You have to take it with existing structural systems and work around them. So, yeah.
But I think the level of consciousness today Also because 20 years ago, the level of awareness was not much. So the level of consciousness did not exist. Today, the level of awareness is much better. So the level of consciousness does exist, which may not allow us to do things in the past, which we could ignore to do, which today we know that we know that this could be a problem. So let's try to, take a avoidance on that. Firas?
Yes.
So the same question continues in terms of stripping buildings, making new ones. What is it that you will be more careful about in addition to what all of the other panelists have said?
Well, I think it's interesting because this leads to an important subject, which is adaptive reuse and refurbishment of existing buildings as a sustainable practice. And I think we could use this opportunity while we are changing the cladding of the building for obviously fire and life safety reasons. Why shouldn't we also use it as an opportunity to look at the sustainability and performance of these buildings? And can the new cladding help make that building perform better? Perhaps we can consider also in some cases where there are certain buildings that need refurbishment or reuse. There are some existing old buildings that could use a recladding job, but could also benefit from a refurbishment or reuse. So I think the sustainability aspect or angle should also be considered into that. Again, sustainability is still being treated in our region as an add-on, as a nice to have, whereas in many countries is already something that is either a must or built into the regulation and the sort of the standards of performance in many developed countries.
Mehboob, your thoughts on this? Probably you'll be doing many projects already.
Yeah, it will be a new challenge because it's not easy to fit the things, and definitely it has a lot of work then to do a new building, because we consider as a part of, but there will be a lot of issues, especially in terms of the coordinations. So definitely it's a new work, it's a new challenge. I mean, it's not an easy job, but we will learn a lot from this new challenges, and there will be new opportunities for the people who can put the new materials and bring their suggestions, bring their proposals. It will be it's a new challenge totally.
So we get a closing thought from Abdulmajid in terms of buildings going forward, refurbishment, safety, sustainability, environment.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to what everybody else said, I think refurbishing facades gives an opportunity to redefine, I would say, the identity of the building, if that makes sense. So if the identity of the building already works, and what I mean by that, I mean the functional heritage, right? Its relationship with the environment, how contextual it is, right? There are many buildings out there, as I said, where the facade makes it disconnected to its context, right? So refurbishment gives the opportunity to reconnect this building with its context, to make it more contextual on every level. So the only one thing that I find it difficult to do, which would be on my wish list, is can we make these facades contribute to the structural stability of the building? Because at the moment, most of these facades are a burden to the structure, to be honest with you, right? They're just sitting there as added dead load, but without really adding any or contributing to, the structural function of the supporting structure. So in the future, if there's a way also, right, to get the function of the facade to contribute in that respect, then it's something that we're encouraging. Again, I find it difficult for existing buildings, but it's definitely something that I would recommend for future buildings as well.
So in a nutshell, just trying to summarize the thoughts that we generated today, that there is more, thanks to COVID, there is more reflection to quality of life, which then takes us to the subject of high-rise buildings and facades for high-rise buildings, whether there are new buildings or refurbished buildings, carbon emissions, sustainability will be looked at more carefully. Population is ever going to increase. definitely. There will be use of new materials if approved by the regulatory authorities. I think there is a great scope for photovoltaics going forward in time now that the cost is not so high as compared to in the past. In order to make safe to fail buildings or good buildings, we have learned that lots of elements like the unfire rated ACP and so on and so forth probably should be avoided to use at all. But the regulator has to take that call. The developers also have to take that call. And I think what all of you are in sync with is to make responsive high-rise buildings. And just at the point that you've just added, contribute to the structural functional ability of the building. So buildings are here to stay, high-rise is here to stay. But I think it also gives opportunity to a lot of newer business models to come along. And Abdul, I'm looking forward to that skyscraper of yours, which is a Lego. Please keep us fully posted on that. And I think the future looks positive. I think people have to become more conscious of the moves and the designs and the elements which are being used. And maybe sometimes to tell your client that if you hired me, listen to me. I don't know how true. Yeah, I know, but I know it's a challenge. But such is life, right? So with that, I'd like to thank all of you to have taken your valuable hour and 14 minutes with this session. We try to repeat this session. We try to make it more interesting and see in the next couple of months if we can come out with a controversial subject. At the last point, I would definitely ask my team to come back to you with a checklist. And let's try to evolve that checklist as a debate that we will take it up in the community. Keep tuned. We will try to do more and more active engagements with you all. And thank you once again very much for all of you to have appreciate. Khuda Hafiz, and be safe and be healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.